All right, y'all. It's Monday. It's Monday. We are back with another session. Let's get into it. So, today we're going to be doing something a little different. All right. Today we're going to be stepping away from investing. Of course, I'm going to sprinkle some investing stuff in there. But what I want to talk to you today is about high yield savings accounts. All right. So, another way to make some passive income. I'm going to do my disclaimer like I always do, and then we're going to jump right to it. So all of the content I share today is for educational and informational purposes only and is based on my own experience. Investing in the stock market always comes with considerable risk. Please do your own research or consult with a licensed financial advisor, tax professional, or some other qualified expert before making any investment decisions. As always, this is a safe space. We're all here to learn. I encourage vulnerability and kindness. Ask questions, take notes. And if you have not, hit the subscribe button, hit the like, hit the share, do everything that you need to do to get this information out there. I'm Confessions of a Black Female Investor. Again, I'm going to always be here every single Monday breaking down some type of financial literacy concept, a lot of information based on investing, but then there's just so much more you can do with your money. So that's what we're going to get into. And again, today's topic is going to be high yield savings accounts. So, what are they? Who can have one? How do you get one? How do you open the account? We're hitting everything today. So, you have the opportunity to make some passive income with significantly less risk than you're going to find with in an investment account. All right, so we got a couple slides for you, but it's mostly just me and you here talking today. And if you do have questions, please drop them in the chat so that I can answer them either real time, but I also have an opportunity at the end of the presentation for you to ask some questions. Okay. So a high yield savings account, what is it? So probably I feel like I've been hearing about them more within the last couple years. They just kind of seem to like kind of pop up out of nowhere. They have been around for quite some time. I won't hit you with the history lesson, but a high yield savings account is an account that generally provides higher interest than a typical savings account that you might find at like your brick and mortar bank. So your Chases, your PNCs, things like that. They're typically online banks, and one of the big purposes of them is to be able to offer better rates. And the way they do that is by not having like a brick and mortar. So they don't have the overhead of paying for a rent or lease or things like that. So they're able to offer back some perks. So online banks is a great place to look, but also I've recently learned credit unions. So if you are with a credit union, credit unions obviously typically, provide better rates when it comes to some products, and high yield savings accounts is one of those. So if you have a brick and mortar that you have a credit union that's a brick and mortar, definitely reach out to them. They may have some really good rates too before you maybe look into the online. I'll tell you one of the kind of the drawbacks of an online high yield savings account. But again, I think definitely the benefits outweigh the cost by far. So whenever you're looking at your high yield savings account, you want to make sure, just like you are doing with any type of savings account, investment account, that is FDIC insured. So basically, that's a fancy way of saying making sure that if something happens, if your money is stolen in any type of way, whether through fraudulence or some other circumstance, that bank is going to reimburse you that money. All right. So again, going back over to your high yield savings account, this is a way for you to earn some passive income. And what you'll learn, kind of my basic concept, is when it comes to new money and how you're earning that income, your interest for that high yield savings account is going to be taxed. So I want to make sure you understand that, because I think I see a lot on social media where they're getting people excited about a high yield savings account and what the returns can look like, and they forget that small piece. And if you are not utilizing this account correctly, which I'll show you how to later, but if you aren't using it correctly, you can rack up a pretty decent tax bill that can take you by surprise if you don't know what you're doing. So always any new money, so that's going to be interest, capital gains when you're talking about investments, dividends when you're talking about investments, understand, with the exception of a Roth, that new money is going to be taxed. So you always want to lock that in. Okay. All right. So, and then again, I talked about a little bit. This is a different product. This is your high yield savings account is a different product than what you're used to when we're talking about investments. Okay, so this is going to be pretty much low to no risk. I would say there's a small risk. And using the word risk is probably not even the best word because we'll talk about a little bit how the rate changes when you are factoring in your high yield savings account and Fed interest rates and how that impacts your high yield savings account. All right. So I do have a couple slides for you because I want to break down some of the products that we're probably used to hearing that kind of mirror high yield savings account, such as money market accounts and CDs. I think that's important to make that distinction. And then, for you to have the informed information to figure out which one of those is best for you. Because I think it depends on your circumstances. I'm a big fan of a high yield savings account. I've had it for years. I make sure I put all my people on high yield savings accounts. I think they have the most flexibility, the most liquidity when it comes to being able to access your money versus, money markets accounts, and definitely more than CDs. So I'm going to just share my screen here and I'll show you a little bit more information about kind of what we're looking at when we're factoring in high yield savings accounts versus other products. So I went through this a little bit, starting with that high yield savings account and comparing it against your standard savings account, what you can expect. Okay. There's a lot of similarities, but the biggest thing is going to be what that interest is, what they're paying you for having your money in this institution. Now, I want to make no mistake, and I want people to understand this is one of the best reasons to have a high yield savings account and to be mindful of what you're putting in that account is when you put your money in a savings account, the bank is investing your money. Okay. The bank is loaning out your money. The bank is doing these things with your money, and that's continuing to make them money. So that's why high yield savings accounts are so much more important. Yes, high yield savings accounts or banks with high yield savings accounts are doing it also. I want to make that clear, but they are just paying you more for using your money. So that's something to consider. But then also, why you want to keep the balance at a minimum over at that high yield savings account and make sure that you are investing a portion in the stock market or some other, appreciating asset, real estate, whatever you choose to do, so that you are getting those higher returns of, 9, 10, 12, 15%, as opposed to, again, the 3 to 4%, 5% that you might find in a HISA, and certainly much better than the 0.1% that some banks, big banks, Chase, things like that, that they're paying you while they're making a significant amount from your money. So keep that in mind. Most HISAs are going to be have no monthly fees. Some at your regular banks are likely going to have some fees. Access is pretty consistent across the board. The biggest difference being that on that online platform, you're going to have to transfer from that high yield savings account into your regular checking account. So that's something to consider too. That's something that I always make sure that I tell my clients. If you are saving for a big purchase, for example, and say, you're planning to buy this Friday, you're planning to buy a new appliance set. You want to make sure that you transfer that money to your checking account no later than like Tuesday to make sure that arrives. So it isn't instant, like you might see with like a Cash App or something like that. It does take a couple days to get there, but it just requires some planning on your part, which again I think is well worth it because as much as it takes some transition time to get there, it gives you a little distance from your money, right? So you cannot run down to an ATM and grab, that emergency fund when it's really not an emergency. You just want, you can't do that with the high yield savings account. And for that, I like that. I think it helps people, serve the saving purpose and achieve that a little bit more. So keeping that in mind. And then just FDIC insurance, again, making sure that whatever account you go with, that you do have that FDIC insurance. And then lastly, the ease of opening. Both of them are really, really easy at this point. Most times you can open them online, but you do have the option of going, into a brick and mortar if that's that's the route you want to go if you're opening a typical savings account. Or again, if you're thinking about using your credit union, then you may have the option of going to a brick and mortar. So it really is a preference thing. They try to make them very similar in those ways. And access is super, super easy. You just have to have your basic things like that to open. Dive into a little bit about the HISA and money market account. So these, again, similar types of products, and that there's low risk because it's not going into an asset going to change in value, right? You're going to have a fixed rate, with a few exceptions for your HISA and your money market account. So keep that in mind, that again, a lower rate, but still some type of return on your money. So some of the differences are typical. Your interest rate APY is going to be about the same, but for your HISA, okay, so online leaders often have the best option. So keep that in mind. Liquidity and access, again, thing, you're mostly going to be transferring with that HISA, where the money market account is potentially going to come with some checks or a debit card. Again, I'm not a fan because it gives you easier access, and we have a way of talking to ourselves and convincing ourselves that we may need money for something, that if it were away in an online savings account that took a couple days to get to us, we may figure out another way and not cut into our returns over time. So keep that in mind. There's a minimum balance most of the time with your money market, and it's going to be higher. So HISAs typically don't, especially at the online banks. You can open a HISA with $1. And you can continue to contribute how you want to, but you don't have to have like a $300 minimum. Money markets accounts, they're often looking at the thousands, whether that's 1,000, 1,500. I've seen minimums of 3,000. So that's something to consider. You're not going to be able to, the whole point, right, is for you to save, excuse me. And so some people may not have $3,000, lying around. This is that tool that they're looking for to save. So that's why the HISA is just a little bit better when it comes to that money market. And then again, ideal use, how you're going to be utilizing this account. This is, your emergency fund. This is for short-term goals. You always want to consider, the money that you may need, again, a little sooner, money that you're investing in the stock market. Okay. All right, then the next one, CDs. Again, I wanted to hit products that I feel like we hear about a little bit more, and just give you an alternative. So HISAs, again, we've pretty much talked about it, so I'll focus on the CDs. So you're going to be looking at potentially a higher rate than your typical HISA, with the rates going the way they're going, and maybe expecting another rate cut this week, which I'll talk about a little bit later. That is going to have an impact on your high yield savings account and the interest that you're getting in that. Okay. So keeping that in mind, that your rate's going to be a little bit higher at the CD. But this is the big thing. So, I talked about the liquidity and the access with the money market account, and I talked about the liquidity and access with the HISA, kind of tiered. HISA is a little bit more restrictive, but your money market, again, if it comes with check writing privileges or even potentially a debit ATM card, it could be pretty easy to access, and there's no time frames limiting that. Now, your CD, you're going to be locked into a fixed term. They can go anywhere from 3 months to 5 years. So you cannot access that money without penalties. So that's something that you always want to consider. If you're looking at, a CD as a potential way to earn some passive income, you want to make sure that you have the time and you don't need that money that's going to be tied up in that CD. That's, again, why I prefer the HISA over that. So I talked about the liquidity, I talked about the guarantee, and I want to be looking at locking in that rate. So again, we're going to talk about, coming up this week, but talking about when you